this video, we're going to be extending how we analyse data by looking at how it's sometimes necessary to recode categorical data to make our analysis a little bit easier and a little bit easier to interpret. So in this video, I'm going to be looking at the relationship between living in the parental home and ethnicity. So if you remember, there is a variable giving the respondent's ethnic group in the original data set. And if we just go and click on the values, you can see that there are a number of different responses here. There are 14 in total. It'd be quite useful to have a look at the frequency distribution of that variable. So I'm going to go back to Analyze, choose Descriptive Statistic, choose Frequencies, and I'm going to run a frequency of ethnic group. I've already been looking at this, so it's SPSS has remembered it and is already in my dialog box. So just to remind you how I do that, I'm just going to get rid of that so there's no variables in the dialog box. I go and find the variable I'm interested in, click it in to the variables list, and then I can click on OK. And so this now is has run the frequency distribution for ethnicity. And as you can see here, this was data that was collected in 2002. By far the majority of students in the data set have a white heritage background. So of the students who responded, there were 3,690 respondents. We can see there are some missing. 28 students declined to answer this particular question. So when we look at the valid percent, which excludes those missings, we can see that in total 85.2% of students were white British, 3.1 were white Irish, and 3.2 had other white backgrounds. So these are clearly the main ethnic groups in the survey. All of the other ethnic groups have much smaller frequency distributions. So if we did a cross-tabulation using this categorization of ethnic group by living at home, the cell numbers would just be too small and we wouldn't be able to see whether there is any relationship. So while it's not perfect, what we can do is see whether there is a difference between students of white heritage and students of non-white heritage. And in order to do that, we need to recode this variable ethnic group into a new variable. So to do that, we go, this time we go to the Transform menu at the top. So I'm going to click on Transform. And here you can see from the drop down, there are two options for recode. Recode into same variables, recode into different variables. I always recommend that when you're creating new variables that you do recode into different variables. It is good practice to keep the original data. So I'm going to choose recode into a different variable. So this opens up a new dialog box for the recode into different variables. So the first thing I have to do is tell SPSS which variable I want to recode. So I'm going to choose ethnic group and I'm going to click it into this middle section here. You can do multiple recodes at the same time, but that can be quite useful if you have variables which have the same values. But just to keep things simple, we're just going to be looking at one variable at a time. You see now we have this yellow bar here. We can see that question 27, so SPSS is now using the name rather than the label, but that I can reassure you is the ethnic group question, and it wants to know what variable, what new variable is going to be created. That's the output variable. So I need to tell SPSS what the name and the label are going to be for this new output variable. So I'm going to call it recode ethnic. So that's its name, and then the label can be a recode ethnic group into binary. Okay, so that's, if I click on change, you can see that that has now appeared in this middle section here. So I'm going to be creating a new variable with the name Recode ethnic and the labels Recode ethnic group into binary. I now need to tell SPSS how the recoding is going to work. And to do this, I need to click on old and new values. Click on that and a new dialog box opens up. It can be a little bit complicated, so I will go through the different steps. Now, I've already made a note of the numerical classifications of the ethnic group variable. I do find it's quite useful when I'm doing a statistical analysis that I have a piece of paper and a pen which I can scribble things down on. So I've already made a note that the values 11 refer in the original ethnic code. That refers to students of white heritage. 12 refers to students of white Irish heritage, and 13, the value 13, refers to students of other white heritage. So what I want to do is recode the ethnic variable here, and you can see it's quite easy. We can actually see what all the categories are because I've got the output window behind us. So I want to have Asian, Asian British, Black Caribbean, Black African, Black British, Chinese, white and Black Caribbean, white and Black African, white and Asian, other mixed background, and other ethnic group. I want to recode those all into the same category, and then recode these 3 white categories: white British, white Irish, other white background, into their own category as well. So this can look a bit confusing, so I'm going to show you how we can do this. So the easiest way to do it is just to do value by value. So I'm going to show you how to do this. So as you can see at the top here, we have value. So if I put the value 11, I've already told you that I know, because I've made a note of it, that 11 actually refers to the white British. And I want that new value, the white British, I want that to become 1. So I'm going to put 1 in the new value there. You can now see that that add button has been highlighted. In order to make any changes, I need to click that add button. When I click that add button, that recoding goes into my old and new box there. If you're going to make a mistake recoding variables, you're going to forget to click the add button. I've been doing SPSS analysis for 30 years and I still forget to click the add button. So again, I want to also put the white Irish, and their value in the original variable is 12. So I'm going to put 12 in the value there. And I also want to recode those into this new white category. So I'm going to put 1 again there, and I'm going to click add. And the final group that I want to put in the white category are the other white background, and they all have category 13 in the value 13 in the original variable. So I put 13 in the old value list, and in the new value list, I put 1, and I can click those in. So that's the kind of, it's always the simplest way, by putting all of those variables in. There are other slightly easier ways, so I'm just going to show you another way, which is might be a little less intuitive, but just saves on a little bit of typing. So actually what I'm just going to do is cancel this and then just go back into it, okay? As you can see, I can also do a range option here. So if I click on range, so if you remember, it's 11, 12 and 13. Those are the 3 values that we want coding to 1. So if I go range 11 through 13 in the old values, we want to recode those to 1 and then click on add. 11 through 13 goes into 1. That's exactly the same as if I was putting all of the individual numbers in. It's just, as you can say, it just saves on a little bit of typing. And as you can see, there's other ways that range works. You can go lowest through value and value through highest. So say if you, I will be showing how those work in another example. Now, all all of the values, all of the ethnic groups, I'm going to put into my non-white. And I don't have to go and enter all of those individually. There's quite a few of them. I can just click this one at the bottom. All of the values are going to be coded too. So I click that and add there. As you can see here, the coding looks a little bit different because it doesn't say all of the values, it says else. So this is the logic coding that's actually going to the SPSS syntax. It's telling SPSS to recode values 11 through 13, so that's 11, 12 and 13. They're going to become 1. All of the values are going to become 2. Okay, so that's I've set that up. So now I can click on continue. I don't have to worry about having a different optional case selection. I'm going to run this for all of the cases in the data set, so I don't have to worry about that if statement here. So the old and new variable values I've done. I've told SPSS which variable I'm recoding. I've given it the new information, so I can just click on OK. So a useful thing now is to go and have a look what that new variable looks like. So I'm going to go back into descriptive statistics, go back into frequencies, and hopefully when I scroll down the bottom, I'm going to find my recoded ethnic group variable. So I'm going to click that into the frequencies. I'll just get rid of ethnic group. If I highlight that, I can click that away. So this time I'm just going to be looking at the recode of ethnic group. It's always important that you look at the recodes just to check that you've done it correctly. You can also look at the cross tabulations between the variables that you're recoding. That's another good way of checking you've done it correctly. But let's just look at the frequency table. So this is the frequency table. You can see that 1 is that the value 1 has, there's 90.9% are coded, 90.9% of the respondents are coded 1 and 9.1% of the students are coded 2. And that's about the right distribution for effort by ethnicity 20 years ago. We would only expect about 10% of students to come from a non-white background. It has changed a lot since then. Now, the other thing, it'd be useful to actually give us some value labels for this new data set. So I'm going to go back to the, I'm now going to go back to the variable window so I can make that change. So if I click on window here, I want to be in the data editor there. So I've chosen to go back to the data editor window. If I scroll down to the bottom, you can see that I've got my new variable recode ethnic, and it's got a label, but it doesn't have any values. So I'm going to give the values here. So if you remember, value 1 was white heritage. Would help if I could spell white heritage, and then I have to click on an add. You always have to remember to click on those adds. It's very easy to forget. And 2 is going to be non-white heritage. Now, I must admit, I haven't worried about the missing cases in this particular recoding. They have actually gone into the non-white heritage. It's a very small number, so it's not something I have to be too concerned about. So I've got this new variable, this recode of ethnic group. So now I can go back and I can do a cross tabulation. So I've gone back to my cross tabulation dialog box. It's remembered what I've done previously, and that's quite a good thing because I'm not going to have to change anything. All I'm going to do is I want to get rid of gender from my column. So I'm going to click on gender there, and I'm just going to click it back. And I want to put my recode of ethnicity, which I know is going to be at the bottom. So I'm going to click that recode into the columns. I don't have to go back into the statistics and the cells. If you remember, I showed that we needed to choose a few options from those. Because this is in the same session of SPSS, those selections are remembered. You only have to go back if you've started a new session of SPSS or if you've clicked the reset button at any time. It's one of the useful things when you're doing SPSS, if you're doing repeating the same cross tabulations, once you've set up the parameters which you want to be using, then all you need to do is just change the columns. Okay, so now let's click on the OK. And here we can look at the data. So we can see that, not surprisingly, the majority of students are of white heritage. We knew that already. If we look at, again, we're going to find that the column percentage is going to be most useful. We find that for the students of white heritage, 77.2% of these students are not living with parents. If we look at students of non-white heritage, we can see that 86.9% of those students are not living with parents. If we go and have a look at the bottom here, for the students who are living with parents, we can see that 22.8% of white heritage students are living with parents. That's almost identical to the total. That's the entire survey. And that's obviously because the majority of students in this survey are of white heritage. In contrast, 13.1% of students from a non-white heritage are living at home. So there does seem to be a much bigger difference than what we saw, for example, when we're looking at gender, but it seems to be that students of non-white heritage are less likely to be living with parents. So we can see that there does seem to be quite a pronounced difference by ethnicity. If we go back down to look at the Pearson chi-squared, again, the value here, 16.745. For those of you who remember the previous video, that's actually bigger than what we calculated by gender, even though the parameters of the cross-tabulation are the same. And here, when we look at the significance, we see that you might think, oh, it hasn't been calculated because it's just a row of zeros. It actually means that the number is so small that the significance is so significant. Is what we also might call the p-value is so small that we don't actually see a value. But that number is lower than 0.05. So we can say again that this difference between ethnicity and living in the parental home is significant at a 95% level. So we can be 95% certain that this relationship has not emerged by chance. So that's how we can recode a variable in order to make some of our cross tabulations a little bit simpler.